When Jasmine Crockett publicly dismissed Donald Trump's recent parade as a failure, her remarks quickly made waves across social and traditional media. She framed the event as a shallow publicity stunt, a lackluster attempt to re-energize a political movement she implied was fading. Her statement resonated with those already skeptical of Trump's continued influence, but it also stirred a quiet frustration among supporters who had witnessed something very different on the ground. Karoline Leavitt, never one to rush to outrage, chose instead to respond with precision and, more importantly, with facts. Appearing on a morning news panel just a day later, Leavitt was asked to address Crockett's claims. The host played the clip of the Congresswoman's comment, then turned to Leavitt, expecting perhaps a defensive or combative reply. What followed was measured, but clear. Leavitt began by acknowledging Crockett's right to an opinion, but immediately drew the line at allowing falsehoods to dominate the narrative. She's entitled to her own opinions, Leavitt said plainly, but not to her own facts. It was a statement that set the tone for what followed, a fact-based rebuttal to a politically charged accusation. Leavitt pointed out that the parade had drawn over 30,000 people, according to both local law enforcement estimates and aerial footage analyzed by independent journalists. She cited logistical data: road closures stretching for miles, overflow parking lots filled, and even mobile cell towers brought in to handle the increased digital activity. These weren't the signs of a failed event. They were markers of significant turnout and engagement. In contrast to Crockett's portrayal of a limp gathering, Leavitt described scenes that spoke of energy and enthusiasm. Families waving flags, veterans holding signs, farmers who drove from neighboring counties just to stand along the parade route. It wasn't a campaign rally in the traditional sense, it wasn't meant to be, but it was unmistakably a show of unity among people who feel increasingly sidelined by mainstream narratives. Leavitt emphasized that the parade wasn't just about Donald Trump, it was about the people who came out in support of what they believe he represents. Economic revival, stronger borders, and a government that listens rather than dictates. She also referenced the local economic data available just days after the event. Small businesses along the route had reported some of their highest sales in months. Food trucks ran out of supplies halfway through the day. Hotels were booked solid the night before and after. This wasn't a flash mob, it was an organized, community-impacting gathering that brought measurable benefits to the area. Leavitt used these numbers to challenge the idea that the event was nothing more than optics. What stood out most, though, was her refusal to take the bait of personal insult. Where Crockett had mocked the event with a degree of sarcasm, Leavitt stayed focused. She didn't question motives, she questioned accuracy. And by grounding her response in hard numbers and real-world effects, she shifted the conversation from one of emotional opinion to one of documented reality. That shift resonated. Even commentators not typically aligned with Leavitt's views noted her ability to keep the discussion grounded, instead of amplifying division. Her response seemed to subtly reframe what political discourse could look like, less about outrage, more about evidence. And, of course, at the center of her response was the figure who had drawn that crowd in the first place. Donald Trump's ability to gather tens of thousands for a non-campaign parade event was, to Leavitt, a signal of enduring support. She didn't build her argument solely around loyalty to him, but instead pointed out what his continued draw represented. Too many Americans. For them, he remained a voice for economic frustration, border security, and cultural values that they felt had been pushed aside. To dismiss their presence and the event itself as a failure, Leavitt argued, wasn't just disrespectful, it was intellectually dishonest. In just a few minutes on air, Leavitt managed to take a cutting remark from a political opponent and use it as a springboard for clarity. Her response didn't rely on flashy rhetoric. It relied on turnout data, community response, and observable impact, all things that challenged the narrative Crockett had attempted to frame. Karoline Leavitt knew that political theater was easy, but connecting events to everyday life was where true communication happened. So when Jasmine Crockett dismissed the Trump parade as just another failed stunt, Leavitt didn't waste her time trying to match the rhetoric. Instead, she shifted the focus to what the parade had tangibly delivered. Her message was simple. This wasn't about flags or chants, it was about the economic and emotional lifeblood of the communities that participated. In Leavitt's view, the event wasn't organized for cameras. It was organized for the people who felt unseen, unheard, and overregulated, and its success could be measured not just in attendance, but in impact. In her televised response, Leavitt made a point to detail how the event injected energy and dollars into the surrounding areas. She talked about small business owners who had prepared for days in advance, hoping for a crowd, and who were met with lines out the door. Restaurants reported record-breaking sales. A local bakery in the town where the parade began sold out before noon and stayed open late just to serve the overflow. Hotels in nearby cities filled up quickly, with guests coming in from across the state and beyond. Uber drivers, parking attendants, food vendors, everyone working that day saw the difference. Leavitt didn't just throw these facts out to win a debate. She framed them as the outcome of something bigger, an organic gathering of Americans who felt connected by more than just political party. They were drawn by a sense of belonging, and that emotional connection translated directly into economic momentum. This wasn't just a parade, she said during the panel discussion. It was a demonstration of what energized citizens can do for local economies, how civic enthusiasm creates real revenue in real communities. And that enthusiasm didn't exist in a vacuum. It centered on a figure whose influence continues to reach beyond national polls and media soundbites: Donald Trump. The people who came weren't lured by entertainment. They came to support a message that had long resonated with them, a message of national revival, protection of American jobs, and a fight against what they see as bureaucratic overreach. In Leavitt's words, they were everyday Americans putting their money and time behind the values they believe are under attack. Her emphasis on grassroots support was deliberate. While Crockett attempted to frame the event as hollow and performative, Leavitt turned the conversation toward substance. If this was a failure, she remarked pointedly, then it's the kind of failure local businesses would love to have every weekend. Her quip wasn't meant to be clevered, was grounded in the evidence. From merchandise stands, selling out of patriotic apparel, to diners having to call in extra staff, the parade left a footprint of movement, not stagnation. Beyond economic outcomes, Leavitt touched on the tone of the parade itself. It wasn't angry, she noted. It wasn't divisive. People stood shoulder to shoulder: farmers, veterans, factory workers, families many of whom hadn't attended political events before. They didn't come because they were told to. They came because they wanted to be part of something that felt real to them. That kind of engagement, Leavitt argued, can't be faked. It doesn't show up in talking points or prescripted political messaging. It shows up in faces, in footsteps, in communities that pause their everyday lives to be heard. She also addressed the media narrative around it. If this were a left-leaning event, with the same turnout and the same local impact, she said calmly, we'd be calling it a movement. But because it's connected to Trump, it's branded a failure. That's not honest journalism, and it's not fair to the people who made this event what it was. For Leavitt, this wasn't about defending every aspect of Trump's legacy. It was about acknowledging a present reality that many in the media and political class seem unwilling to see, that his message still activates something in a large part of the population. And when that activation results in thousands coming together peacefully, boosting local economies, and signaling their continued presence, it can't be ignored or minimized without distorting the truth. Her response brought clarity to an event many were quick to brush aside. She didn't have to embellish or exaggerate. She simply connected the dots between turnout and impact, showing that what some dismissed as empty showmanship had in fact generated measurable value for the people on the ground. In today's political environment, where confrontation often grabs the spotlight, Karoline Leavitt's response to Jasmine Crockett's criticism of Donald Trump's parade stood out precisely because it didn't rely on shouting, sarcasm, or partisan jabs. Instead, Leavitt demonstrated something far more effective: poise. Her calm demeanor, measured tone, and command of the facts did more than just counter Crockett's claims. It earned respect from across the political spectrum and drew attention for all the right reasons. When the clip of Crockett calling Trump's parade a weak, failed spectacle was played on a news panel, all eyes turned to Leavitt, expecting fireworks. She could have launched into a defensive tirade, fueled by the emotions many Trump supporters felt. After all, the parade had drawn tens of thousands, created economic ripples in the community, and energized the base in a way few recent events had. But Leavitt didn't escalate. She listened, paused, and then delivered a response that turned the conversation from spectacle to substance. She began by disarming the tone. Congresswoman Crockett is free to express her opinion, Leavitt said, keeping her voice steady. But what she said wasn't just dismissive, it was inaccurate. Then she calmly outlined the numbers. Over 30,000 attendees, packed hotels, local businesses reporting their best sales in months. With each point, she emphasized that the event had not only drawn a crowd, but made a real-world impact. What made her response so compelling wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it. There were no raised eyebrows, no interruptions. She didn't try to outshout or humiliate her opponent. Instead, she chose to clarify. And in doing so, she shifted the conversation away from partisan soundbites towards something more grounded, the lived experience of Americans who showed up because they believed in what Trump represented. That authenticity didn't go unnoticed. Across social media, even some independent voters and moderate commentators noted how Leavitt's tone stood in contrast to the usual partisan noise. She didn't rant. One tweet read, she just calmly laid out facts and let the numbers speak for themselves. Another user commented, whether you like Trump or not, Leavitt showed how to respond with grace under fire. It's not easy to change minds in modern politics. But Leavitt's performance reminded people that how you deliver your message matters. Rather than fueling tribal divisions, she elevated the discourse, something increasingly rare in a media landscape dominated by confrontation and outrage. Her ability to defend the event, and, by extension, Donald Trump's enduring influence, without alienating others, marked a notable moment for her and the broader conservative movement. Even journalists, who often scrutinized Trump's team, were taken aback by the approach. One political analyst on cable news remarked that Leavitt managed to push back hard without pushing people away. In that moment, she proved that sharp, principled responses don't require sharp tongues. They require clarity, confidence, and composure. Her presence on the panel also reflected something else: how the new generation of conservative communicators, especially women like Leavitt, are reshaping what it means to engage politically. They're not just defending party lines. They're engaging with real-world outcomes. And when someone like Crockett tries to undercut the meaning of a Trump rally by calling it a failure, Leavitt doesn't have to match the criticism blow. Instead, she calmly reorients the discussion around results and values. Her approach created a ripple effect. Conservative outlets applauded the message, calling it a masterclass in media discipline, while even some left-leaning commentators admitted that Leavitt's confidence and grasp of the facts made her a formidable communicator. The clip of her response was shared widely not because it was explosive, but because it felt rare. A political figure refusing to take the bait, refusing to escalate, and still winning the argument. At the heart of her response was an unwavering belief in the movement Donald Trump helped galvanize. Leavitt didn't have to exaggerate his popularity. She pointed to the turnout, the energy, and the economic impact the parade created. In doing so, she made the case that Trump's relevance wasn't theoretical, it was visible, measurable, and real. Leavitt's.com defense of the parade wasn't just a win for Trump supporters. It was a reminder that leadership isn't always loud. Sometimes, the most powerful message is delivered quietly, with facts, respect, and confidence. The exchange between Jasmine Crockett and Karoline Leavitt over Donald Trump's parade didn't just reveal contrasting views about the event. It illuminated a deeper divide in how political figures approach messaging. Crockett's remarks were sharp, dismissive, and aimed to paint the parade as a flop, signaling that Trump's movement had lost momentum. But Leavitt's response brought the conversation to a different level, one that emphasized tone, message discipline, and a commitment to substance over theater. Her reaction was more than a rebuttal. It was a case study in how tone and delivery are becoming as important as the message itself in modern political discourse, especially for the rising generation of leaders. Leavitt didn't try to dominate the panel discussion or score points with soundbites. Instead, she leaned into precision. With a calm voice and clear articulation, she dismantled Crockett's portrayal of the event as a failure. She cited attendance numbers well over 30,000 people and gave real-life examples of how the event had positively affected the local economy. Her tone wasn't smug or sarcastic. It was steady, even respectful, and that was the key. She didn't just defend the parade. She invited viewers to reconsider what success actually looks like in a political context. What became obvious during her response was that Leavitt understood the weight of how a message is delivered. She didn't allow Crockett's sarcasm to throw her off. Instead, she used the moment to elevate the conversation, bringing attention to the fact that dismissing an event with such a significant turnout wasn't just unfair, it was disconnected from reality. In doing so, she subtly exposed how some public figures are more interested in narrative control than in acknowledging facts. That contrast in approach drew attention. Across social media and in political commentary, the discussion shifted from whether the parade was successful to how effectively Leavitt managed the exchange. Political strategists took notice. Some pointed out that her calm response reflected the kind of tone voters are increasingly craving, especially independent voters and those fatigued by years of hyperpolarized discourse. Her ability to stay focused on the facts, while presenting them in a non-combative way, made her argument more accessible and persuasive. Her presence also reflected a generational shift. As a younger conservative voice, Leavitt represents a movement that's not just about echoing Donald Trump's message, but about refining the delivery. She didn't compromise the core ideas that animate Trump's base: economic strength, national pride, and anti-establishment sentiment, but she presented them in a way that felt composed and grounded. For many watching, that was refreshing. It wasn't a denial of Trump's populism, it was a professional adaptation of it, designed to resonate in both red and purple districts. Even as she defended Trump's parade and the supporters who attended, she didn't fall into the trap of trying to match her opponent's tone. Crockett's style, brash and confrontational, has its audience, but it often alienates others who are looking for leaders willing to speak plainly without talking down. Leavitt recognized that. She made her points clearly, but with respect. She gave no space for personal attacks and avoided overgeneralizing or vilifying those who disagreed with her. This moment also offered insight into how messaging in politics is evolving. where once the loudest voice often commanded the most attention. Today's media environment rewards those who can balance passion with discipline. Leavitt's ability to hold her ground while maintaining civility put her in a category that many politicians struggle to reach. Credible, relatable, and composed under pressure. Asterisk at the heart of her response was a quiet confidence in her facts, in her voice, and in the significance of the movement she was defending. The people who showed up to that parade weren't just showing support for Trump, they were expressing their frustration with Washington, their concern for the country's future, and their belief that their voices still matter. Leavitt gave those people a voice on national television without turning it into a spectacle, and that was perhaps the most powerful takeaway from the entire exchange. Asterisk in choosing to respond not with outrage, but with clarity and calm. Karoline Leavitt showed how tone and substance together can redefine a political moment. She didn't just represent a political side, she represented a different standard for how that side communicates, and in doing so, left an impression that went well beyond the topic of the parade itself. Asterisk. Karoline Leavitt's response to Jasmine Crockett's dismissal of Donald Trump's parade didn't just stand as a rebuttal, it became a moment that crystallized a larger shift in the political landscape. In an era where viral moments are often fueled by outrage and personal attacks, Leavitt chose a different path. She leaned into facts, tempered her tone, and trusted the intelligence of the audience. That choice didn't just serve her well in the short term, it may have helped redefine what effective political communication can look like in the future. Asterisk, rather than trying to out-yell or out-insult her opponent, Leavitt did something more strategic. She reframed the conversation entirely. She took what was meant to be a throwaway insult, Crockett calling the parade a failure, and transformed it into a discussion about real-world impact. Her emphasis on economic benefits, emotional energy, and community involvement redirected the spotlight from drama to substance. It was a subtle but powerful shift. Asterisk. Leavitt also demonstrated that Donald Trump's influence cannot be reduced to caricature. For many in the media, it's easy to portray his supporters as blindly loyal or out of touch. But what Leavitt showed was that there is a sophisticated and deliberate defense of Trump's presence in the American political landscape, one that is based on tangible outcomes, grassroots enthusiasm, and a sense of national identity. The people who attended the parade weren't simply following a personality. They were participating in a cultural and political movement that continues to have momentum, despite efforts to downplay or discredit it. Asterisk. What stood out most in Leavitt's performance wasn't just what she said, it was the composure with which she said it. In the face of ridicule, she didn't flinch. She didn't mock. She didn't fall into the trap of tit-for-tat politics. That kind of steadiness is rare, especially among younger figures navigating the pressures of national attention. But Leavitt embraced the moment not to elevate herself, but to elevate the truth about what the event had meant to so many Americans. Asterisk. In doing so, she left a lasting impression. Her response wasn't just a win in a debate, it was a statement about leadership. That leadership is not defined by volume, but by clarity. Not by confrontation, but by conviction. And not by personal ambition, but by a commitment to represent those who feel ignored or misunderstood by the political establishment. Asterisk. As the dust settles on that media exchange, what remains is a clear image of a rising voice that understands the pulse of the people and the demands of the modern political stage. Karoline Leavitt didn't just fire back, she reset the terms of the discussion, and in doing so, reminded viewers that it is still possible to win a debate with grace, substance,